The text arrived while I was shaking hands with Marcus Holloway, CEO of Titanium Industries. Position terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out tomorrow. Don't bother coming in. My phone buzzed against the conference table where I just spent 6 months negotiating the biggest deal in my company's history. $48 million. Marcus was still smiling, pen hovering over the contract that would change everything. I didn't flinch. My hands stayed steady as I smiled back at him. What my boss Derek Patterson didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact moment for 3 weeks. Ever since I discovered his plan to fire me the day after this deal closed, then take full credit for my work. My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm 42 years old, and until that text message, I'd spent 11 years as Senior Acquisitions Director at Patterson & Klein Industries. I'd built their entire aerospace division from nothing, found clients, negotiated contracts, generated over $200 million in revenue. Derek had been dropping hints for months. Younger talent, fresh perspectives, corporate restructuring. The same tired excuses companies use when they decide experience costs too much. But I'd caught the real truth 3 weeks ago when Derek's assistant accidentally forwarded me an internal email. The subject line read, VH termination timeline. Inside was Derek's plan laid out perfectly. Let Victoria close the titanium deal. Fire her immediately after. Promote his nephew Kyle to take her position and claim credit for the acquisition. I'd smiled when I read that email. Then I'd started planning. Derek thought I was just another middle-aged woman he could push aside. He had no idea what I was capable of. The Titanium Industries deal had been my project entirely. I'd identified Marcus Holloway's company as a perfect acquisition target 8 months ago, researched their patents, analyzed their market position, and spent countless nights building the relationship that led to this moment. Derek had attended exactly 2 meetings, both times showing up late and contributing nothing useful. Yet he planned to stand in front of the board next week and present my deal as his strategic vision. But I'd made one critical move Derek didn't know about. 2 months ago, I'd quietly registered my own consulting firm, Hayes Strategic Acquisitions, LLC. The paperwork was filed. The bank account was open. The business structure was airtight. I'd used my personal savings and kept everything completely separate from Patterson & Klein. My employment contract had a standard non-compete clause, but I'd reviewed it carefully with an attorney. It only prevented me from directly competing for existing Patterson & Klein clients. Titanium Industries wasn't a Patterson & Klein client yet. They were my personal contact brought in through my own network. That legal distinction was about to become very important. Marcus noticed my phone light up with Derek's text. Everything all right? He asked. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Perfectly fine. Just my boss confirming he trusts me to finalize everything. Marcus laughed. Derek's lucky to have you. This deal wouldn't exist without your persistence. He had no idea how right he was. I'd spent 6 months flying to Chicago monthly, meeting with Marcus and his board, addressing every concern, and building the trust necessary for this acquisition. Derek had done nothing except approve my travel expenses and complain they were too high. Now he wanted to fire me and steal my work. I looked at Marcus and made a decision that would change everything. Marcus, before you sign, I need to be completely honest with you about something. His expression shifted to concern. I pulled out my phone and showed him Derek's text message. Then I explained the situation fully. How I'd built this deal personally. How Derek planned to take credit. How I'd just been fired while sitting across from Marcus finalizing everything. Marcus's face darkened as he read. This is how Patterson & Klein treats their top performer. He nodded. It's how they treat anyone they think they can replace cheaply. Marcus set down his pen. Then I have a question for you, Victoria. Do you have your own company? Smiled. As of 2 months ago, yes. Hayes Strategic Acquisitions. Then here's what we're going to do, Marcus said, pushing the Patterson & Klein contract aside. Titanium Industries will work with you directly, not with a company that doesn't value your contribution. Can you handle a deal this size independently? My heart was racing, but my voice stayed calm. I've been handling it independently for 8 months already. The only difference is whose name goes on the contract. Marcus extended his hand. Then let's make this official. I'll have my legal team draw up a new contract with Hayes Strategic Acquisitions as the consulting firm. You'll earn the full commission Derek planned to deny you. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of what had just happened. I just stolen my own deal back. We spent the next 2 hours working with Marcus's attorneys to restructure everything. Instead of an acquisition, it became a strategic consulting contract. I would advise Titanium Industries on their expansion strategy, facilitate partnerships, and handle the integration work I'd already outlined. The total value was actually higher than the original deal because I structured it as ongoing consulting rather than a one-time acquisition. $52 million over 3 years. My commission would be 15%, paid quarterly. That was $7.8 million. Derek had been planning to pay me a $75,000 bonus for closing the deal, then fire me. Instead, I just secured generational wealth. Marcus smiled as we finalized everything. Derek's going to be furious. I drove home that evening in a daze. My phone was exploding with messages from Derek, each one angrier than the last. Answer your phone immediately. You're making a serious mistake. Legal will be contacting you about breaching your contract. I ignored every message and called my attorney instead. Her name was Patricia Wong, and I'd hired her specifically for this situation. They're threatening legal action, I told her. Patricia laughed. Let them try. You didn't steal a client. You developed a relationship independently, and they fired you before any contract was signed. Their non-compete doesn't apply. Plus, that termination text is evidence of wrongful termination. We could countersue easily. I felt relief wash over me. So I'm protected. Completely, Patricia confirmed. But expect Derek to escalate before he accepts reality. Document everything. Save every text, every email, every voicemail. Don't communicate with Patterson and Klein directly anymore. Send them my contact information and tell them all communication goes through me. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This definitely qualified. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Kyle, Derek's nephew, who was supposed to take my job. Victoria, I don't know what happened, but I'm sorry. This isn't right. I stared at his message, surprised. Kyle was 29, fresh from business school, and completely unqualified for my position. But apparently he had a conscience. I decided to respond to Kyle. Thanks for saying that. For what it's worth, this isn't your fault. Your uncle created this situation. His response came quickly. He told the whole office you stole the titanium deal. But I saw your files. You built that relationship completely on your own. Everyone knows it. I appreciated his honesty, but it didn't change anything. Derek was going to spin this story however benefited him most. The truth didn't matter to people like him. What mattered was controlling the narrative. By tomorrow morning, I'd be painted as a disloyal employee who sabotaged the company. But I had something Derek didn't have. Evidence. And a client who knew exactly what had happened. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Patterson and Klein's legal department. They were demanding I cease all contact with Titanium Industries and threatening legal action for breach of contract. I forwarded everything to Patricia, then got dressed and prepared for what came next. I knew Derek would call an emergency meeting. I knew he'd tell everyone I'd betrayed the company. And I knew Marcus Holloway was about to make a very public statement that would destroy Derek's credibility completely. At exactly 9 a.m., Marcus posted on LinkedIn. His post was simple and devastating. Excited to announce Titanium Industries has partnered with Hayes Strategic Acquisitions for our expansion strategy. Victoria Hayes is the most talented consultant I've ever worked with. The post included a photo of us shaking hands, professional and confident. Within an hour it had 500 likes. Within 2 hours, People were commenting asking about the connection to Patterson and Klein. Industry contacts who knew I'd worked there were confused. Marcus responded to several comments with the same message. Victoria is independent now. Patterson and Klein didn't value her appropriately, so we're working directly with her firm. My phone started ringing with calls from former colleagues. Some were congratulating me. Others were asking what really happened. I kept my responses simple and professional. I decided to start my own firm. Marcus preferred to work with me directly. I didn't trash Derek. I didn't need to. The facts spoke clearly enough. By noon, Derek was in full panic mode. He called me directly, his voice barely controlled. You've destroyed everything. That deal was Patterson and Klein property. I stayed calm. No, Derek. That relationship was mine. You fired me before any contract was signed. Marcus chose to work with my firm instead. Derek's voice rose. We invested in your travel, your time, your salary for 8 months while you developed this deal. You owe us. I almost laughed. I owe you nothing. You were planning to fire me, steal my work, and replace me with your unqualified nephew. I have the emails, Derek. The timeline you created. Everything. Silence. Then quietly. You're making a big mistake. I hung up without responding. That afternoon, I received calls from 3 other potential clients. Word was spreading fast in our industry. The story of how I'd turned a firing into an $8 million consulting deal was apparently very compelling. One caller was Andrew Brennan, CEO of Velocity Tech Victoria. I've known about your work for years. Derek always took credit, but everyone knew the deals were yours. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership. By the end of the day, I had meetings scheduled with 4 major companies. All of them had worked with Patterson and Klein before. All of them had apparently been more impressed with me than with Derek's company. I was building a client list faster than I'd imagined possible. A week later, Patricia called with news. Patterson and Klein dropped their legal threats. Their attorneys apparently explained they have no case whatsoever. But there's something else you should know. I braced myself. Derek's telling people you signed the titanium contract on company time, using company resources. Patricia sounded amused. Which is technically true, except you were fired via text before signing anything. Their own termination message proves you were no longer their employee when the deal closed. It's actually helpful evidence for us. Smiled. Derek was so focused on controlling the narrative that he kept creating evidence against himself. So what happens now? Yes. Patricia paused. Honestly, think you've won. They have nothing. 2 weeks after the titanium deal closed, I received a formal offer from Velocity Tech worth $35 million over 2 years. My second major contract. I hired 2 associates to help manage the workload. Both of them talented professionals I'd known for years who were tired of corporate politics. Hayes Strategic Acquisitions was becoming a real company remarkably fast. Meanwhile, Patterson and Klein was struggling. Without the titanium deal, their quarterly projections had collapsed. Their stock dropped 12% when they announced the lost contract. Derek was called before the board to explain what happened. According to Kyle, who kept me updated, Derek had tried to blame me entirely. But board members had started asking uncomfortable questions about why their top performer had been fired. One board member, Helen Fitzgerald, actually called me directly. Victoria, I'm trying to understand what happened. Derek says you stole a client. But Marcus Holloway says you built the relationship independently and were fired unjustly. I explained everything calmly and factually. The 8 months of work. Derek's termination timeline. The text message firing. Helen listened quietly. And you have documentation of all this? I did. I sent her copies of everything. Derek's emails about firing me. Text message. Marcus's statement. My travel records showing I developed the titanium relationship entirely through my own efforts. Helen thanked me and ended the call. 3 days later, Derek was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Kyle texted me when it happened. Derek's gone. The board is furious. Apparently you weren't the only person he planned to push out and replace with cheaper employees. They found a whole list. I felt a grim satisfaction. Derek's scheme hadn't been about just me. It had been about cutting experienced employees and replacing them with recent graduates he could pay less. The board had discovered he'd been systematically planning to fire 5 senior directors, all over 40, all highly paid. It was age discrimination wrapped in corporate restructuring language. And now it was costing him everything. The board asked if I'd be willing to return to Patterson and Klein. I declined politely. I had something better now. 3 months after being fired by Text, Hayes Strategic Acquisitions had 6 major clients and annual projected revenue of $140 million. I'd hired 8 employees, all experienced professionals who'd been pushed out by companies like Patterson and Klein. We worked from a small but professional office space downtown. No corporate politics. No taking credit for other people's work. Just talented people doing excellent work and being compensated fairly. Marcus Holloway became one of my biggest advocates, introducing me to other CEOs and vouching for my expertise. The Titanium deal had closed successfully, and their expansion was exceeding projections. Marcus made sure everyone knew I was responsible. Victoria doesn't just close deals, he told people. She builds relationships that create long-term value. Derek was officially terminated from Patterson and Klein 4 months after he'd fired me. The board's investigation had uncovered his age discrimination plan, along with several instances where he'd taken credit for other employees' work. His reputation in the industry was destroyed. Cal actually reached out to ask if I was hiring. I learned more watching you work than I did in 2 years of business school, he admitted. I appreciated his honesty and his willingness to acknowledge Derek's mistakes. I hired him as a junior consultant. He was smart, willing to learn, and importantly, he understood the value of treating people with respect. Under proper mentorship, Kyle would be excellent at this work. He just needed to learn from someone who actually knew what they were doing. A year after being fired by Text, I was invited to speak at an industry conference about building successful consulting firms. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood on stage, looking out at an audience of executives and consultants. I told my story honestly. The firing, a deal. The decision to sign the contract under my own company. I emphasized the importance of documentation, knowing your legal rights, and never underestimating your own value. After my presentation, I was approached by dozens of people. Some were executives asking about my services. Others were professionals who'd been pushed out by their companies and wanted advice. One woman, probably in her late 40s, had tears in her eyes. "You gave me hope," she said simply. That conversation stayed with me. My story wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about refusing to accept someone else's assessment of my worth. Derek had looked at me and seen an expensive employee he could replace. He'd never considered that I might be the actual source of value he was trying to claim. His biggest mistake wasn't firing me. It was underestimating me. Patterson and Klein eventually stabilized under new leadership, but they never recovered the ground they'd lost. Several of their top clients switched to working with my firm. Not because I poached them, but because they preferred working with people who actually did the work rather than people who took credit for it. Hayes Strategic Acquisitions continued growing steadily. By the end of year 2, we had 15 employees and annual revenue exceeding $200 million. I'd built something sustainable, something based on actual relationships and real expertise rather than corporate politics. My commission structure was simple and fair. Everyone who worked on a deal shared in its success. No one's contributions were minimized or stolen. And we absolutely refused to work with companies that had patterns of pushing out experienced employees. It became our reputation. Hayes Strategic Acquisitions. Where talent is actually valued. Derek never recovered professionally. Last I heard, he was working in middle management at a small firm, making a fraction of what he'd earned at Patterson and Klein. Looking back at that text message, the one that arrived while I was shaking hands with Marcus Holloway, I realized it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Derek thought he was ending my career. Instead, he freed me to build something better. The envelope I'd metaphorically handed him that day contained something he never expected. Not just a lost deal, but proof that the value he thought he owned had always belonged to me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's succeeding so completely that your former company becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the people who actually create your value. Derek had given me a gift, even if he didn't realize it. He'd forced me to bet on myself. And I'd won.